Welcome to Freddie's Huge Ask Podcast. Huge lives and the stories behind them. And now here's your host, Freddie Cruz.
Go. All right, we're in.
My man.
How are ya?
Good. How the heck are you?
Oh, I'm good. Busy.
A little bit. You know, you've got the Amazon series coming up and all that excitement and the book, of course.
Yeah, I just got off the phone actually just now with the Amazon crew looking at the trailer, which is looking really good. So that's sweet. Yeah, so that's coming out here, and then before the series comes out, and it's looking sharp.
You had this deal come up with Chris Pratt with the first novel. So I mean, this has been years in the making, but I mean, now we're like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you got all these different.
Feels like a marathon length sprint.
Well, yeah, I imagine it's nonstop, but nonstop for years. So, I mean, what's it like to get to see the official trailer? Because getting the deal is one thing, signing it's another.
Yeah. So it's so I've been involved with every step of the process, which isn't typical for authors. Usually, they like to get rid of the author right away so that the author's not like on set yelling, "You ruined my vision" or anything like that. So. And, being a student of this from my earliest days, I was well aware that there's going to be changes and you're telling a story visually instead of on the written page. And that's just how it goes. And the example of First Blood, the book written in 1972, it's never been out of print, which is coming up on its 50th anniversary, by the way. And the movie, both outstanding, but very different from one another. So I understood that going in. And when you hand something like this over to somebody else, there's a lot of trust involved. And that's why a lot of them usually end up on a shelf or end up totally different or whatever. But in this case, I was handing it to Chris Pratt and Antoine Fuqua. And those guys are amazing. And we had this trust, and all three of us wanted to keep the gritty, visceral, violent, authentic nature of the book, and knowing that, hey, there's going to be a few changes here along the way. And they stayed true to that. And those guys were amazing. I got to be on set. I got to advise on the scripts. And me, Chris, and Antoine are executive producers. And so we were just going over that trailer. And I've seen a bunch of different iterations of it because we've been working on it, editing it, and all that sort of a thing. And then it just went in front of some test audiences who thoroughly enjoyed it, I think is the best way to put it.
In getting to know you by watching the videos, of course, I've spoken with you last year, but in getting to know you, watching videos of you, listening to your podcast, which, by the way, is amazing. It seems to me like you are just a forever student. Like you're constantly wanting to learn this, learn that, learn as much as you can. So have you taught yourself how to edit video? Because it's just so cool. There's just so much to it.
It's important to know your capabilities and your limitations. I know that I cannot physically edit anything as far as video goes, anything technical. I need a piece of paper and my red pen right here. That's the kind of editing that I do. So when I go through these things, whether it's an episode or it's a trailer or whatever else, I do the timestamps. I'm like, okay, at 1 minute and 13 seconds, this needs to change, or that I recommend this, or whatever it is. So that's how I have gone through the editing. And the editing on the episodes started even before we wrapped. So we wrapped in August of this last year, August of 2021. But we've been recording or been filming since March of 2021. So those first episodes are done. So we're already starting edits on those as we're moving in to these other episodes and still filming, because it's a series, an 8-part series. So the editing seems like it has been going on almost from day one, not quite, but almost. Probably the end of April is when I saw a first cut of the first episode. And there's director's cuts, and there's network cuts, and there's editors cuts, and producers cuts, and all that sort of a thing. So it's been a constant process up really until we locked the episodes maybe a couple of weeks ago. And then when you do that, then the visual effects people come in and they can start scrubbing out the wire, the cable that's attached to a stuntman that pulls them when there's an explosion, because doing that visual effect stuff is so expensive. So you want to lock the episode, and then they go in and make those final changes visually. And then worked on the trailer and the teaser and get those where they need to be, and surpassing everyone's expectations at Amazon. That's for sure. So that's pretty cool.
It's nuts to me that we're now at a point where we can do something like that. So I mean, the stunts obviously get crazier and even more insane now that we know we can blot out the cables Whereas, Sylvester Stallone wasn't able to, well, I don't know much about those movies back in the day, but I imagine the technology was nowhere near what it is now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'd be very curious to know what movie they first used that kind of a cable on, where they have these pneumatic things that yank the stunt man and then send them flying somewhere. But
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it might have been like a green screen with with stuff that's added in later, and then pads for that person to land on. But where these guys landed when these cables and explosions went off, like there weren't any pads. Like these guys are hitting walls, and I couldn't
Yeah.
believe it. The body's flying through the air. I was like, dang.
That's when they tell the stunt guy, okay, you're going to sign this disclosure right here that your family will not sue us if you die.
Yeah, it's serious. It's totally serious. I think Stallone, did he break a part of his spine in one of the Expendables movies, getting slammed against a wall? It might have been with a cable. I can't be sure, but it was in a fight scene in one of the Expendables movies. But man, he goes all in. I know in those early movies, like we already talked about First Blood, but that was one of the last ones where it was all the people doing stunts. It was no green screens and no visual effects. It was people throwing themselves off things and fighting and all that. So it was now, of course, there's some more, you can use technology a little bit, but our goal on this one was to really keep it visceral and violent and authentic, and not a lot of I love the John Wick movies too, but there's it's choreographed violence. Sure. Instead of like what would happen if we walked outside and got in an altercation. That would look a little different than what you see in the John Wick stuff. So yeah, there was a conscious effort to keep everything visceral and violent and as authentic as possible.
When I had listened to a podcast that I cannot remember what it was, they had mentioned producers and screenwriters having sort of a bias toward novellas, short length novels. What I think is so cool is that from the get-go, because they signed you with the very first James Reece book, and so you've got this in-depth story that's 400 some odd pages. These are monster books, highly engaging. So I think that is really, really cool that they were not like, okay, well, you know what, Jack, this is really cool, but can you dial it back to like 220 pages?
Yeah, no. On the scripts, they might do that, because that's their world, scripts and how long it takes to film things, knowing that you have an hour for an episode, that sort of a thing. But you need a little more than that because you're going to edit some things out. So that might come into play a lot more when you're actually doing the screenwriting. And for me, I was just a sponge on that because it was my first time involved in that sort of a thing. At the outset, it was me, David DiGilio, who's the showrunner, who's kind of like what a director is for a feature film, a showrunner is for a series, because you're managing multiple directors and all sorts of chaos. So it was me and him from the get-go, and Antoine and Chris. But we put this thing together, and then Chris and Antoine and David DiGilio, the showrunner, they went out and shopped it and gotten bidding wars between these different streaming services, and then Amazon ended up with it. But then they put the writers' room together to build out the rest of the episodes, and advised on those and saw how that process works and see how they continue to evolve. Because with a series, even if you have something that everybody likes, well, guess what? When you bring these actors in, now they're interpreting these roles in a way. They're not just doing as they're told. Like they're reading the material and they're looking and they're getting to know this character. And as they do that, just the way they portray these characters changes things, which means that this next script and next script and the next script have to change. So it's this constantly evolving process that was fascinating to be a part of. But like I said, I was a student the whole time. I was a sponge, and now I have a good understanding of how it works.
But Jack is not going to be up at 3 a.m. on Final Cut Pro trying to learn how to edit video.
Nope. Like I said, it's important I know not even to attempt that. Just like with the podcast, I bought the stuff, I got the headsets, I plugged them in, I got the cards to record on, all that stuff. But when it comes to that next step, which is uploading it somehow to something that puts it out on these different platforms, maybe doing a graphic, maybe adding some video, negative. That is not I will never get to a point where I can do that, do it well. That's when you bring in the professionals. So important to know those capabilities and limitations.
Well, I got to tell you, man, so the new book, in the blood. I have not been this pumped about an American battling a Russian since Rocky and Drago. This is
Seriously.
like insane. So what kind of research did you find yourself doing to get into the thick of this plot?
Yeah. So the first one, I pretty much done the research by being a SEAL, by being a student of warfare for my entire life. That second one, I needed to put boots on the ground in Mozambique for True Believer to see what's going on over there and to really get that flavor to put that into the novel. I'd already been to Morocco. I'd already been to Ukraine, Odessa. So I chose some places that I'd already been for that one, as well as going to Mozambique. And for Savage Son, I had to go to Kamchatka, Russia. I had to really smell the soil and really get to know the plants and the animals and the people and the terrain and be able to weave that into the story as well. And then the next one, COVID hit. So for The Devil's Hand, I was very fortunate that I already knew it was going to take place primarily in the continental United States, in places I had already been. And a lot of that research was academic, and that was biowarfare and that sort of a thing, bioweapons research. So I got to go in depth in research, but I didn't have to travel. And then for this one, very similar in that I didn't know really anything about quantum computing, artificial intelligence, where we are with that sort of a thing, who are our near peer competitors there with those. And so I went deep on that. And I'll tell you what, I think for the people that have read it, they tell me that part is scarier than the bioweapons research that I incorporated into the last novel. And I agree with them, because the capabilities that we have out there and the people that I talked to about it actually told me, they said, hey, we could tell you more, but then your book will go into the science fiction category because people won't believe it. And it was shocking what I found out and got to incorporate in this novel. So most of that's the kind of research that I did for this. And then the sniper stuff, where I have more of a background and more of a foundation, I just got to confirm a few things here or there, bring in some different weapons that were specific to those areas of the world that would make sense for the characters to use and carry. So it was fun to write, and ended up being my most action-packed novel to date. And I didn't start out with that as the intent. That just happened naturally.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip. I've got notes and notes for this interview, dude, and I'm gonna go ahead and skip because a friend of mine, Aldi. So the publisher, backtracking a little bit, the publisher had sent me 2 copies, and I don't know if it was by mistake or intentional. And I'm like, all right, hey, look, David, that's the publicist, and I'm like, David, I got an extra copy. I'm happy to send it back, or can I give it to somebody? He's like, oh, yours to give away to whoever,
Awesome.
have fun. So I gave it to my friend Aldi.
Awesome.
And I'm like, dude, this author is incredible, and you got to read this book. And oh, by the way, I'm interviewing him next week. If you have any questions, please let me know. So he sends me a text. And so I'm just going to read you the message. It was a long one. I sense Jack has an undertow of mixing his story with current modern day politics that is in many ways currently dividing our country. I wonder if these are his own observations, or is he getting various input from his old friends and such to give him more insights that he translates into his own storylines? I'm specifically referring to when the president wants Jack to read into the program that would allow him to become the ASDSO/LIC after his mission. And then I want to build off of that because you specifically reference X key score, Prism, and the Utah database that everybody seems to not know about.
Yes, there's a lot going on there. So ASD Solic, for those listening, is Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Low Intensity Conflict. And that was the one that I was always drawn to in my academic study of warfare and looking into the people that held that position, particularly from September 11th on. And I think we had some people in there with military backgrounds in special operations. But if I had headed down that academic track and just continued to study warfare and then got into the policy space, that would have been an option where one would go. So that's why I was aware of that position to begin with. And that's always been a position that seemed interesting when it comes to our government, our bureaucracy, our intelligence and military apparatus. So that's why that made it in there. And then the other ones, those comes from research from Snowden's book. Edward Snowden wrote a book. There's a couple others out there and articles as well, things from The Intercept. Really, some of the last real investigative reporters out there that are looking into really government overreach, abuses of government power, those sort of things. And in today's day and age, that tends to be more along the lines of technological capabilities. And what is the government doing? What are private sector companies doing? And what are they sharing with the government, and why? And how does that take place? And so a lot of those that I wove in there are for people that may have read those books or are curious and going to look them up and get led to the books. And I talk about all those books at the end in the acknowledgments that I used for research to come up with this, because I didn't know half of what those terms were when I started. I'd heard a couple of them, Five Eyes, and a couple other ones I was semi-familiar with, but not from my time in the military. I didn't have touch points with any of that sort of thing. Mine was a little more basic, finding a target and going in to kick a door in the middle of the night. So when I get to do research like this into something that's going to affect future generations, I like to look at it through a few different people's perspectives. And that's not just for this one thing, technical surveillance and data and that sort of a thing, data collection, but any position. I like to kind of sit back, because I have that luxury of doing that as an author, and I get to look at it from a few different people's perspective, an enemy's perspective, different people in our own country that might have different thoughts on it, and then through my protagonist's eyes as well. So it's very therapeutic to do that sort of thing. And I think it lends itself a little bit to more of a thoughtful examination, because even if you don't agree with something, you're still looking at it through someone's eyes and trying to humanize that character at the same time. Because readers will have touch points, and they recognize when something's real and authentic and when it's not. So I think it lends itself to some thoughtful introspection, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, and for readers listening to this interview and you're not familiar with X-Keyscore and Prism, these programs were in place for quite some time, and news had broken what very few institutional media companies covered them. This was back in 2013 and 2014. So this is almost 10 years ago. I can't imagine what the security state apparatus is now.
Exactly. A lot of that is dated. And of course, when you're talking about Edward Snowden and his book, like that, some time has passed now.
Yeah.
It seems like yesterday, because there's so much going on, but it really wasn't. And so things have progressed. If you're just thinking about the progression of technology in general, well, think of it in those terms and what we learned back then and what's possible today. And that's what I got a lot from the in-person interviews that I did with people who had touch points with the national security apparatus and data collection.
Right. Well, and this specific passage immediately reminded me of the meme. And actually there are 2 or 3 versions of this meme going around where the year is 2032 and you don't have the proper nameplate on your Facebook profile page. Therefore, we disengaged your electric vehicle and we're not going to send plant-based meat to your house.
Yeah. I mean, you can get really conspiratorial about a lot of this stuff. But then when you look back, just not even to the too distant past, you can say, oh, geez, some of these things that were fringe or conspiracy and labeled as such by maybe people who have a vested interest in labeling it as such are now have been proven true.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing. And so some things that are now conspiratorial, like, oh, why do they want to get you all in electric cars? It's for the environment. Maybe a little bit, but where does that electricity come from? Okay, fine, coal for the most part. But it also allows a government entity to possibly influence a private company that is in charge of your power and turn it off for national security reasons. So there's I don't mean to keep coming back to it, but just in my research and in my writing, things keep coming back to control. And it's very interesting how that's happened. I didn't start off with, hey, how does the government want to control us? And then get there. I just started writing and writing these stories. But there is this common thread when we talk about large institutions, whether they be government or some of the companies in Silicon Valley, when it comes down to control in a lot of these cases. So it's just one of those things where I kept being led, and I don't I'm not trying to run there. I just being led in that direction from my research.
I think it all goes back to the fundamental fact that governments are force. Like they literally cannot exist without pointing a gun at you or threatening to throw you in a cage.
Yeah, they're supposed to have the monopoly on the use of force
Yeah.
for the most part, and that's why like always like to touch. Like to have a touch point with the Second Amendment and individual responsibility that we have in this country that most other countries do not, where we are allowed to defend ourselves because of this document that is writing down something that is God-given or natural. And what I mean by natural is that if you were to land here on this planet from another planet and someone tried to kill you, you would probably try to defend yourself. And I think that's a good way to put it. You don't need to be told, hey, you should defend this gift of life. And here's a document that says you're allowed to. No, if you're just thrown here just appeared out of nowhere and you were attacked by a person or two or three, you knew somehow inherently that this gift of life is special and that you have a responsibility to protect it. And that's just a natural thing.
Yeah. Well, and I also wanted to go back to a specific line from a larger passage, and it reads, this isn't a plot spoiler, it reads, it was getting harder to know the difference between the US system and that of the former Soviet Union. And having read the Communist Manifesto and a little bit of Marx, that one really hit me. So
Yeah.
can we dive a little more into that passage and the one that also references Stalin?
Sure. Yeah, it's just being a student of history and recognizing what generations in the past sacrificed for us to have freedom, how to have these options and opportunities that we have here today, and then to see elements of our society actively trying to curtail those freedoms, and possibly they don't understand, they don't appreciate what was sacrificed so that we could choose our own destiny through our own choices. But it's a very real thing, and institutions and professions that used to be the front line of some of these defenses are now actively calling for censorship, which is astounding to me, who grew up in a time when and was taught that, hey, we have this thing called the First Amendment. And that's the one thing that really binds us together as Americans, is that if I don't agree with what you're saying, I will step up and defend your right to say it as an American. That used to be that thing that was our and the best ideas would then percolate to the top in the marketplace of ideas. And now, instead of letting those discussions, thoughtful discussions, respectful discussions, and different ideas and arguments, and out of those have the best ideas percolate to the top, now we get, oh, I don't like your idea, I'm going to cancel you. That is kind of what we've devolved into. And what we used to have is we used to have attorneys, you had publishing houses, you had newspapers, you had magazines, you had these people on the front lines and professions on the front lines, journalists, authors, stepping up for people that they disagreed with. And now we have those same institutions, those same professions actively trying to censor people that they disagree with. And that part is what I mean by talking about how if you were the enemy, if the Soviet Union still existed, maybe they didn't really need to go bankrupt. Maybe they just could have just waited on us to destroy ourselves from the inside and become more like them, because we're moving that direction. And I had a great guy on my podcast, but Rick Prado, and he was born in Cuba and before the revolution. So he was 11 when he came to this country, and he got to see the government, the revolutionaries come and take his family's property, make it, he said he saw the dregs of his town now end up in positions of power, confiscating things that other people had worked for. And he came to this country, started over, went to an orphanage first because they got him out before the parents, and parents came about a year later, found him at the orphanage, and a great American success story. They started over with nothing here in the United States, but you know what? They could choose their path. They had options and opportunities here. And I talked to him about this very question. He then went on to join the CIA, had an incredible career in the Central Intelligence Agency, just a legend. And he has a book out called Black Ops. We talked about that, but I asked him this very question about, because he still has memories of Cuba. He has memories of those people coming to his family's house, confiscating their property in the name of the revolution. The Castro youth, people on their streets listening, reporting anything negative about Castro to the government, and those people would disappear in the middle of the night. He remembers that. It's not just a story that he read. That's a very real thing, and it can happen in a heartbeat. And we think it can't happen here because it hasn't happened here, but it most certainly can, because our freedom is not the norm.
I'm in the Houston area. I live in Richmond, which is a suburb of Greater Houston, and Harris County, which is the largest county in Texas. They had a rat line during COVID times, during the lockdowns. Hey, is your neighbor having a party, gathering of more than however many people in 2020? I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? Yeah.
Look at the Stanford prison experiment. Give somebody a little power, and look what happens. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's nuts. And you talk about the gentleman from Cuba, and I'm reminded of the Scuritate from Romania and the Ceausescu family in the 90s. And I read a wonderful book by Rudis Apetis called I Must Betray You, which is about that revolution. And
I'm gonna write that down.
yeah. Oh, dude, I might have it here, but oh man, it's here we go. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the best books I've read so far this year.
Wow.
And I had her on the podcast. She interviewed the guy who pulled the trigger on Christmas to execute the Ceausescu's. And yeah, it was just it was phenomenal hearing her speak about her experience, because she did go to Romania for research.
Yeah, it's something we need to be aware of, and that's why I try to promote reading and the study of history at every opportunity, and try to promote thoughtful discourse. Because the times we live in right now, certainly social media and these companies don't benefit from us having thoughtful discourse about really anything. They benefit from us being at each other's throats and being able to tweet something out that someone else just has sent out there that also didn't put in the requisite time, energy, and effort into really understanding the issue on which they're commenting, which they're retweeting. So it's a very interesting time to be alive. So it takes active thought, and you need to make sure, I think, that you don't fall into that trap of just being outraged all the time and just tweeting away and getting mad at people, and because it's going to affect you and everyone around you, and it is not good for the future of our nation.
Right. Well, and what's crazy to me, Jack, is that when you put on your human history goggles and you zoom out, and how many hundreds of thousands of years we've been around. I mean, Cuba and Romania and the fall of the Soviet Union, that happened 5 minutes ago. Heck, World War II happened 10 minutes ago or an hour ago, depending on how you look at it.
There's it's a very, only for a very slim portion of human history have we been able to have these kind of be at each other's throats the way we are now, and try to take away rights from ourselves, from future generations, from our fellow citizen, or advocate for that. Because in the past, we would have been worried more about just defending our life, the life of our family, the life of our tribe, our community, putting food on the table, and then defending it from rival tribes. That's most of human history. So we all have that innately in us somewhere, knowing how important it is to defend life, because if we don't, guess what? There's no future generations. And what do you have to do that? Well, you have to be good at fighting, and you should be good at putting food on the table. Those are the basic necessities. And with COVID, it was a wake-up call for a lot of people, but most people just went back to the normal thing once they saw this food was going to be on the shelves of the grocery store again. And they were at a scare for a second, but some people didn't. Some people were like, okay, it is my responsibility as a citizen, as a husband, husband, as a father, to look out for my family. And what do I need to do that? Maybe we should get some fire extinguishers. Maybe we should get some water. Maybe we should get a little bit of food just in case. Maybe we should learn how to defend myself and my family if it comes to that, if there's nobody on the other side of this 911 call. And by the way, even if there is, they're probably showing up after the fact to make a police report rather than be there to defend you, unless you're a politician that has taxpayer funded security armed next to you at any given moment.
Before we wrap up the interview, I'd like to do a bit of a rapid fire with you,
Yes,
Jack.
for sure.
Last book you read, and what are you currently reading?
No, we already talked about it. Black Ops, because I did the interview yesterday with Rick Prado. So I read that. So most of the books that I'm reading these days are either for research for the novels, or they're going to be guests on my podcast. So I have a ton of them right over here. I mean, stacks and stacks. I did a blog on it. It's so messy. I'm not even going to turn the computer screen. But that it kind of forces me to read those books because I have a guest coming up, rather than being like, oh, I got to put it off. I need to do something else or whatever it might be. So typically that's what they are these days. But yeah, Black Ops was the last one I read by Rick Prado, and it's awesome. I mean, I'm giving it to my daughter very shortly here, because I think learning about the revolution in Cuba, learning about what happened there, seeing the parallels with what's happening here, that would be very useful for a kid in high school. Very beneficial, I should say, for someone to read.
What is the most unlikely book you refer to for research?
Ooh, the most unlikely. That's a great question, because most of them fall into that realm of national security, intelligence, data collection, that sort of a thing. Unlikely. I know there's got to be one.
Have you read Romance to build up James and Katie's relationship?
I have not, although Desiree Holt sends me books. She has a SEAL protagonist, and she's amazing. She's 80 something years old and writes these romance novels, and she sends them to me. So I do. So I do have a couple on the shelf for Desiree.
Favorite place to write?
Anywhere that is quiet and that minimizes or eliminates distractions, or I shouldn't say distractions, interruptions, because there's plenty of distractions. You can find them anywhere you look, but it doesn't matter. I don't need a view. I don't need anything like that. I just need a quiet space where I'm not going to be interrupted. So that has changed over time from the little office off our bedroom in Coronado, California, when I was still in the military, where I'd write from 10 at night to 2 or 3 in the morning, because that's the only time I had, to then going to the local library when we moved up here to Park City, because they have these little rooms that you can use for a couple hours at a time. And if no one else is waiting, you can continue to use them and just lock yourself in a little jail cell and write away. And then this time, because then COVID shut that down a bit, but it did open back up. But then I started renting Airbnbs around town, so I could just go there and have everything really at, I found a little cabin where I can go, where it's just, there's a wood burning stove and I chop wood and feed that fire. And then I have a little kitchen table there and a little kitchen and bedroom, bathroom, deck, a wood pile outside, and just right there, because it's quiet and there aren't any interruptions. So it's really any place that's quiet and no one's interrupting you.
When writing a novel, which is harder, the first sentence or the last sentence?
Ooh, I don't know about harder, but I do really love thinking about the first sentence and the last sentence, because they're so important. So I don't know if I've ever thought of it in terms of what is harder, because you have time to think about these things as you go along. The first sentence, I'm trying to think if the first sentence has changed much. The last sentence I spend a lot of time with, because I've been working through the novel for so long, and then I get there and I want to do something special with that last sentence or couple sentences. But I don't know if I've ever thought of it in terms of harder. So I don't think either are harder, but both are equally important.
Well, let's expand on that. What is harder or easier, I guess, the first chapter or the final chapter? So I guess the first chapter / prologue, or the final chapter / epilogue.
Yeah, and that's how I typically do it, is a prologue and epilogue. For whatever reason, I like that structure, and I like the 3-part series, although this last one, In the Blood, has 4 parts in between. It was just naturally came out that way. But I don't know if there's a harder or not, because once again, they're both so important, just like that first and last sentence, because that first sentence, that first chapter is keeping people moving forward. And that last one is leaving that anticipation. So it's resolving enough of that conflict so that people have got essentially their money's worth, but also leaving just that little bit unresolved that makes them want to get the next book. So that's the art of it. But I wouldn't say one is harder than the other. Both, just like those first and last sentences, both are equally important.
3 things the everyday American should know about a U.S. Navy SEAL.
Oh, geez. Probably, hey, just normal people. That's the main thing. It's just totally normal. 3 things. I don't know. I mean, some of them are obvious, like we're aggressive problem solvers. Like that's okay. But I think the main overarching thing is that just like any other profession, and whether you're an A-list movie star or you're a Navy SEAL or whatever else, you're just a person, just normal people doing a job. And some of those jobs are a little more high profile, which means that you have to adapt. Like if you're an A-list star, to going outside and being recognized and that sort of thing, and know that that's a part of it. Or as a Navy SEAL, knowing that, hey, you're going to have to continue building your skills always. But that's really anything in life. Just on the Navy SEAL side of the house, you have to do it because it's not just a responsibility for you and your family. It's for the people next to you that are going down range with you, and by default, their families. And it's not just that if you mess up, they're going to be losing a job or anything like that. They're going to be losing their lives. So I think, it was like 2, but.
Oh, that's
good. I'm on the spot.
Yeah, no. That's great. That's great stuff. Jack Carr, that's Carr with 2 R's. JackCarrUSA.com is a place to go. Get the James Reece series, all of the books. Okay, every single one of them. The new one, In the Blood, is going to be out May 17th. You got the series that hits Amazon Prime in the summer, starring Chris Pratt. And coming up later on the month, we've got an in-person Q&A at Memorial City Mall with Jack. So we need you to come on out, get your copy of In the Blood. And of course, you can check us out in person for the live Q&A hosted by me with Jack as well. And this is going to be so much fun, and really appreciate you taking the time to join the pod.
Absolutely. Thank you. I always enjoy it, and I sincerely appreciate the questions, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.